Christine Anderson. When Grandpa passed, it didn't hit me the same way it hit the others. I wasn't crying in the will reading room, but I wasn't stone-faced either. Truthfully, my grief had come quietly over the months I watched him fade, not in some dramatic scene like my Aunt Cheryl probably rehearsed. She even dabbed her eyes with an embroidered napkin she carried, like she was starring in a Hallmark movie. I sat near the back, turning his old key over in my pocket. Brass, worn from years of use, a little bent at the handle. No one knew I had it, not even him, technically. He'd slipped it to me weeks before he died. "You ever need to disappear from them?" he'd said with a sideways glance. "This place will teach you to survive people like them someday." At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. But when the will was read and the cabin was named, not even mentioned by its address, just the property up north, in the pines, nearest Wolf's Creek, heads barely turned. Aunt Cheryl scoffed under her breath. My cousin rolled her eyes so hard I could practically hear them move. "No one's fighting over the shack, I assume?" the lawyer asked. "It's basically abandoned," Cheryl muttered. "I doubt it has plumbing." I wanted to speak up, say something about the sunsets up there, or the fireplace Grandpa and I fixed together, or how I'd watched fawns drink from the stream in the early mist. But I didn't. I just listened, held the key tighter, and stayed quiet. To them, it was a useless shack. To me, it was the only place that ever felt like mine. When I drove up a week later, the dust along the gravel road kicked up behind me like smoke in a memory. Pines flanked the path, humming low in the wind like they remembered me. The cabin stood the same as it had for years. A little crooked, a little tired, but proud. I unlocked the door and stood in the dim light, letting silence wrap around me like a welcome I hadn't known I needed. The fireplace still had half-charred logs in it. My flannel from 2 summers ago still hung on the nail near the door. I could almost hear Grandpa's boots on the boards. I spent the next few days cleaning, not because it was dirty, but because I needed to make it feel like mine. I swept out pine needles, scrapped mildew from the windowsills, replaced a cracked pane with a spare I found in the shed. I didn't tell anyone where I was. On the 3rd night, I built a fire and read one of Grandpa's old journals. He used to write everything in spiral notebooks, mostly thoughts that only made half sense unless you knew him. That night, I came across an entry dated just 2 months before he died. "Some people inherit cash, others get problems. I'm leaving the kids something real, a tool, not a prize. That cabin kept me sane. Maybe it'll keep them whole." I stared into the flames long after the candles burned out, holding that thought in my chest like it would break something if I let it. He saw something in me the rest of the family never has. I wasn't the loudest or the flashiest or the most ambitious. I was just the one he trusted. For a while, it seemed like no one else even remembered that piece of the will. It wasn't on social media, it wasn't valuable. It was mine, in the quietest way imaginable, until the cousin who rolled her eyes posted a story 3 weeks later. She was on the front porch. Summer home vibes. Thanks, fam. She was holding my key, or a key. And in the background was the view I thought no one else had bothered to look at twice. The creek, the pine shadows, my chair. And suddenly the cabin wasn't forgotten anymore. The day after the will was read, I tried making small talk in the hallway, just to test the waters. Aunt Cheryl was reshuffling her designer tote and whispering sharply to her daughter about some travel plans when I gently mentioned the cabin. "I think I'll head up north this weekend," I said. "Just want to check on the property Grandpa left." She paused for half a second before plastering on that signature sugar-coated smirk. "Oh, that thing?" she said, waving her French-tipped hand like she was swatting away a bug. "It's barely livable, sweetie. Do yourself a favor and stay somewhere with working plumbing." Her daughter, my cousin Ava, chuckled behind her phone. She never looked up. "Still kinda wild he didn't just sell it," Ava said. "I mean, it's just sitting there." She scrolled a bit before adding, "Would have made a great group weekend spot." I didn't say much else. It was easier that way. Their words didn't sting so much as they confirmed what I'd always known. They never saw value in anything that didn't shine. Over the next week, I prepped supplies, quietly packed up some essentials, and drove up to the cabin. I didn't owe anyone updates. No one asked. And honestly, it felt liberating. When I arrived, even the air felt different. Crisp pine and damp bark. The kind of quiet that buzzed softly in the background. Alive but not demanding. I opened the garage, aired out the living room, and settled into a rhythm. Cleaning, fixing, breathing. Grandpa had a stack of tools I remembered organizing with him one summer. I swear his label maker still smelled like the same cheap plastic. The water lines needed flushing, and I replaced a back window screen that had been torn by wind or animal or time. My body ached each night, the kind of ache that came from doing something real. I'd forgotten how good that felt. I started journaling too. Not for anyone but myself. Just little daily notes in a spiral notebook like he used to do. My first entry. Odd how peace can come from dust and splinters. I think he meant for it to. For 2 full weeks, no one bothered me. Not a call, not a text. It was blissfully lonely. Then one afternoon, after a quiet hike and a cup of coffee on the porch, I heard my phone ding. A text from an old college friend. "Is that your cabin in Ava's feed?" I blinked, heart already pounding before I even tapped the link. It loaded slowly on my mediocre signal, but when it finally opened, it hit like ice water to the gut. Ava, on the porch. My porch. She was lounging back in the old rocking chair, 1 foot up on the railing like she owned the view. Her platinum bikini top and boho-style wrap made her look like she was modeling for a travel influencer reel. The caption read, "Mountain vibes. Thanks, fam." My thumb trembled a little as I swiped through the next few. Slides a cup of matcha on my kitchen counter I'd just scrubbed clean with baking soda. The fire pit outside with lit torches. Charcuterie board I know she didn't make because I still had the damn raccoon-chewed cutting board tucked behind the stove. She was there, in my space, without permission. Without even telling me. She hadn't asked. Hadn't knocked. Hadn't called. She just went. Part of me wanted to believe it was old photos. Something maybe from before. Maybe I'd forgotten she ever went once with Grandpa. But no, the new rug I'd bought was in the corner. The mug she was using? I'd brought it myself last Sunday, so the photos weren't old, and they weren't hers to take. I sat at the edge of the porch, phone in one hand, and stared out at the same trees she posed with in her background. The birds sounded distant now, like my ears were underwater. What was it that Grandpa always said? Some people treat roots like rope, only tight enough to pull what they want. That photo confirmed one thing. They didn't forget the cabin. They just assumed I wouldn't use it, or worse. They didn't believe I had any right to say no. I didn't reply to the texts. Didn't comment on Ava's post, but I did start documenting everything, just in case. The next weekend, I decided to show up without warning. No cryptic calls, no hinting around it, just drove up early Saturday morning, taking the back trail around the ridge so they wouldn't see me. Coming, and there they were. 3 cars lined up on the gravel like a beach resort check-in. One of them was Ava's white Jeep plastered in bumper, stickers about self-love and sustainability. A cooler half blocked the porch steps. Flip-flops, half a joint, and someone's designer sunglasses were strewn across Grandpa's handmade bench. From inside, I heard music, not loud enough to rattle windows, but enough to feel wrong. Not just because it disturbed the quiet, but because it didn't belong here. Nothing about this belonged here. I opened the front door and walked in. Their laughter cut off like a needle scratching vinyl. Ava stood frozen near the fireplace, holding a phone on a gimbal. 2 of her friends were sprawled on the couch, surrounded by fast food wrappers, nail polish bottles, and a speaker pumping some mellow indie girl track. "Oh, hey," she said slowly, like she'd caught me wandering into my own kitchen. "You're here." I stared at the mess first. The once vacuumed rug now crusted with soil and someone's glittery makeup bag. My reclaimed wood coffee table blotched with oily pizza boxes. A candle burning near the stove with wax dripping directly onto the hardwood. "You changed the Wi-Fi name?" I asked, blinking. She shrugged. "Yeah, LOL, can't survive up here without signal. We figured you weren't using it." I didn't respond right away. My hands were so tight at my sides, I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Ava raised both eyebrows like I was the one making a big deal. "Chill. We didn't know you were going to turn into Bob Vila and move in or whatever. You've always been so Introverted. We figured, it was just sitting here. Her friend chimed in with a laugh. Totally off-grid vibes, though. We're gonna rent a projector for next weekend. Fire pit movie night. She's joking, Ava said quickly, but there was an edge in her voice. Like she wasn't. I finally took a breath. What gave you the impression it belonged to you? Ava opened her mouth, hesitated, then smirked. Okay, look. No one was using it. You didn't post anything. There's no lock. My mom said it wasn't even in livable condition. We just came to air it out. To film reels? I asked. To host your friends? Ava scoffed. Oh my God, are you seriously mad about this? He was our grandfather, too. You think he would have wanted this place wasted on one person? I looked around the room. At the tipped-over lamp, at the water stain on the coffee table, at an empty vodka bottle leaning against a photo of me and Grandpa in our fishing gear. No frame, just taped to the fridge. I think he would have wanted it respected, I finally said. Ava traded looks with her friends, then turned back to me with that same edge her mother used any time she felt exposed. All right. Fine. We'll go tonight. Don't get all aggressive. Just saying, it's family property. It's not like it's some $1 million estate. I didn't argue. I didn't scream or push or yank the speaker from the shelf like I wanted to. I just nodded, walked outside to cool off, and stood under the wooden awning Grandpa built by hand. Inside, they started packing, loudly, like they wanted me to feel bad for interrupting. Like I was the unreasonable one in this situation. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was watching them show their hand. Entitlement wrapped in crooked smile logic. If you're quiet, you don't count. If you don't post about something, it isn't real. If you don't fight us, we must be right. That night, after they left and I collected their trash, including half a cupcake smashed into a floor vent, I sat on the porch and typed another journal entry. They didn't break in like thieves. They entered like owners, with assumption, without respect, and dripping with imagined righteousness. I washed the pillowcases twice, left the window open to air out that artificial candle scent they liked, and then I checked the locks. The next morning, I ordered a camera system, not to watch them, but to record, in case they came back, not as guests, but as trespassers. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of talking outside. High-pitched, excited voices layered over shoes crunching on my gravel drive. At first, I thought maybe hikers had taken a wrong turn until I peeked through the curtain and saw Ava again. She was back, with more people. 3 girls I didn't recognize and 1 guy carrying a ring light and a folding table. They treated the porch like a photo shoot set, dragging my chipped enameled chairs aside to get a clean aesthetic, laughing loud enough to startle the birds. One of them filmed the others doing slow turns against the railings. I stepped outside and stood silently by the door. Oh my God, Ava spun around. I didn't realize you'd be here again. I kept my expression flat. I live here now. She blinked like I was speaking another language. Okay, but you said nothing last time, so we figured you were just here sometimes. Honestly, we planned this weekend over a month ago. It's tradition now. Tradition. Nothing burns quite like someone building tradition out of your stolen piece. The guy with the tripod nodded to me slightly. We'll be quick. Just filming some content. This isn't a studio. It's private property, I said. Ava waved her phone. Yeah, but Grandpa wouldn't care. Anyway, I already posted that we'd be up here through Sunday. Don't worry, you won't be in the background. That was it. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I went back inside and turned on the cameras I'd installed just 2 days earlier. 2 synced inside, 1 covering the porch, and another tucked under the back awning pointed at the drive. The next 48 hours were a blur of their noise, music echoing into the trees. Shrill pool floats inflated up at the creek even though the depth barely covered your ankles, wine bottles half buried in the garden bed Grandpa once tended. At one point, I saw 1 girl dragging my grandmother's old quilt over a pile of gravel. For texture, I assume. I kept track. I screenshotted posts. I saved stories. I recorded when they left the door open long enough for a raccoon to enter and knock over dishes. I logged the exact time Ava shrieked at a girl for spilling red wine on her new sun hat, then dumped it out on my back steps like it was nothing. When they'd finally left late Sunday afternoon, the cabin smelled like a rental house after spring break. I tossed the cracked mason jars they claimed were ambiance lighting and swept 3 flattened roaches out from under the couch. And then I got a text from Aunt Cheryl. Just 1 sentence. You need to lighten up. Family doesn't evict family unless you're a bitter little landlord. No greeting. No apology. Just a cheap jab wrapped in fake wisdom. I stared at her message and thought about every holiday dinner I'd sat through, biting my tongue while Cheryl told stories that always made her the centerpiece. The victim, the survivor of imagined dramas. Ava was her mirror. Louder, social media polished, but just as practiced in painting the victim role first. I didn't reply. I also didn't call the cops. Not yet. Instead, I backed up every video clip, every photo, and every time-stamped social media post. I uploaded them to a private drive. I printed a copy of the deed. I emailed myself photos of the porch before their visit, and after. I pulled local regulations on trespassing, short-term rental violations, and squatter laws. Knowledge was power. Proof was power with a seatbelt strapped on. Because Ava was escalating, and Cheryl had made it clear they didn't see me as family unless I played by their rules. Rules they changed whenever it suited them. Whether it was holidays, inheritance, or property, it didn't matter. They assumed silence meant submission, but there was something Grandpa used to say, and I could hear it again so clearly now, like his voice was hiding somewhere behind the wind. The quieter you are, the better they'll hear your no. And when it came, it wouldn't be shouted, it would be recorded. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside, a snapping branch, a car in the distance, wind brushing pine needles, sent a flicker of anxiety through my chest. Not fear, just that gut-deep tension, the kind Grandpa once told me was older than language. The kind that says, something doesn't feel right. I sat at the table alone while the cabin creaked and settled around me, the way old structures do when the sun disappears and stories wake up. There was a single lantern burning, the glass warped with age, casting thick shadows across the walls. And then I remembered the letters. They were kept in that wooden box Grandpa carved when he quit drinking, said he needed something to build while he gave his hands something else to hold. I'd tucked it under the bed after he passed, unopened. Not because I forgot, because I wasn't ready. Until now. I pulled it out and opened the lid. The smell hit instantly. Cedar, tobacco, dust. Inside were 3 notebooks, a folded flannel handkerchief, a map, and 2 envelopes with my name scribbled, on the front in his shaky but unmistakable handwriting. I read them all. The first was dated 2 years before his heart started failing. He'd written as if he was talking across the table from me. No fluff, no big lessons, just steady, gentle caution. You aren't like them. Don't lose your softness just because they hide theirs under sharp words and louder voices. He talked about the cabin like it was a living thing. Warned me that blood didn't make people safe. That most folks only like peace until it means they can't be in control anymore. Whatever you do, he wrote, don't sell this place just to shut them up. They'll never understand what it means to earn silence. The second envelope had paperwork, the deed, notarized, but with something extra. Attached to it was a small, neatly typed page detailing a unique clause he'd set up using a local land protection trust. Apparently, years ago, knowing the family would come sniffing around, he put the cabin under personal ownership with historic use exemptions that protected against unauthorized rentals or occupancy, even by family, unless they were specifically granted access in writing. Everything Ava had done was legally trespassing. Cheryl couldn't spin it. Even if they painted me as possessive, the law, his foresight, was on my side. Grandpa hadn't just left me walls and wood. He'd left me armor. The final item was the most unexpected. A hand-drawn map of the cabin and surrounding trails, folded 11 times and tucked into the back of the notebook. There were little notes he'd scribbled over landmarks like, "Where I kissed your grandmother," and "Watch for coyotes here. They're clever." But on one corner, inside the walls of the cabin itself, he marked something I'd never noticed. Loose board, west wall, near stove. important. I stood up instantly, still barefoot, still in pajamas. I tiptoed across the room to the back wall, heart rattling against my ribs. The lantern flickered behind me, like it sensed something too. I gently tapped along the wooden paneling until one plank gave way. Not much, but enough. I wedged my fingers behind it and pulled. Inside was a rusted tin cookie box. Inside that, more letters. Some to Grandma, one to Mom, never sent. But beneath them, folded into a Ziploc bag, was the original loan contract from the year the cabin was built. His name was the only one on it. No Cheryl, no anyone. I don't know why I cried. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was guilt for thinking, even for a second, that I'd been left vulnerable. But he knew. He knew everything that would happen. The invading smiles, the fake apologies, the casual theft. And still, he trusted me. Not because I was loud, but because I listened, and now, so would they. It only took a week for them to come back. Despite everything, the cameras, the quiet confrontation, the mountain of disrespect, Ava and her little swarm rolled right up the gravel like they had reservations. Like nothing had changed. They didn't even knock this time. I wasn't at the cabin when they arrived. I'd gone into town to meet a local lawyer recommended by one of Grandpa's old hunting buddies. A solid woman named Carla, sharp, formal, didn't blink when she reviewed my folders and camera footage. The fact they keep documenting their behavior is doing half the work for us, she said, flipping through the screenshots of Ava's stories. And those trust clauses your grandfather set up? Honestly, genius. He must have been planning this for years. While I talked next steps and potential cease and desist filings, my phone buzzed again and again. When I finally checked, I saw why. Ava had gone live. Not just a story, a full Instagram live stream, 20 minutes long, saved and reshared by her friends. The title was Rural Vibes and Cabin Drama. I tapped through the video with building fury. She strutted through my kitchen wearing my oversized flannel like a costume, holding a mason jar and narrating in a fake mountain accent. So this is our lil rustic summer spot, she said, pausing dramatically. My cousin thinks it's like sacred or whatever, but I mean, nobody was using it, so don't mind us, y'all. There was laughter in the background. Then came the punch. She leaned dramatically toward the camera and whispered, "Just wait till I redecorate this crypt keeper shack. Honestly, I think he's just mad we figured out his haunted hideaway. Like, sorry, your personality is trees and silence, bro." I stopped the video. I couldn't stomach more. When I got back to the cabin that afternoon, I found drinks scattered on the porch, extensions cords running from an open window, and Ava's Prius parked halfway on the vegetable patch Grandpa built beside the creek. I approached calmly. No shouting, no panic. Inside, 3 people I didn't recognize were dancing around in my living room while Ava filmed near the old bookshelf I'd just restored. She turned as I walked in and rolled her eyes like I was the one, interrupting something sacred. "You again," she sighed. "I never left," I said. She thrust her phone back into her tote. "Okay, so you're just gonna haunt the place now? You can call the sheriff if you want, by the way. We're not doing anything sketchy." "You're trespassing," I said coldly. Again, Ava folded her arms. "It's funny how territorial you're getting. Over a shack no one cared about until we gave it actual energy. Look, I know you're lonely or whatever, but this grumpy forest goblin thing is kind of pathetic." One of her friends muttered into their drink. "Woodsy hermit vibes." Everyone laughed. My throat felt tight, but not from shame. From restraint. I looked around the room, noting the clutter, the damage, the complete lack of remorse. Then I noticed something on the kitchen counter. A small bag, half crumpled, next to a lighter, and in Ava's open tote, a vial. Something powdery. I walked over calmly, took out my phone, and bent down. The camera clicked. A close-up of the bag, the vial, and her phone screen opened to Instagram. Time-stamped, documented. Click, click, Ava. Froze. "What the hell are you doing?" I stood and met her eyes. "What you've been doing." Collecting content. Are you trying to blackmail us now? Threaten me with that? You said I could call the sheriff, I said. I just plan to give him something to look at when I do. The smile slid off her face, just briefly. Just enough. Then came the defense mechanism. She laughed, loud and fake. Oh my God, relax. That's not even mine. It's from last weekend. Caleb left it, okay? You're taking everything way too seriously. No, I said. I'm just taking it seriously enough. I turned and headed for the door. You have 1 hour. To do what? To get out, before I do make that call. Outside, I leaned against the porch post and scanned the trees. Wind moved slowly through the leaves. Even the birds had stopped watching. 1 hour, and then, no more warnings. The wind hadn't even died down from their tires kicking up gravel when I pulled out the binder I'd been building like armor. Most of it was already organized. Timestamps, screenshots, a full folder of video footage from the security cameras. But after that last visit, with drugs in plain sight and her smug, go ahead, tell someone attitude ringing in my ears, I knew it was finally time. No more patience. No more polite warnings. I called Carla that night. She didn't answer on the first ring, but when I texted the photo of the evidence Ava so graciously left behind, she responded in under 2 minutes. Come in first thing tomorrow. By the time I arrived at her office, I had everything with me. She greeted me like I was an old friend arriving with storm footage, calm, serious, and silently impressed. I laid out the entire package on her conference table, photos of alcohol bottles, broken furniture, the altered Wi-Fi name, and yes, the pictures of the drugs. Good, she said, flipping through. And you said this was the 3rd unauthorized entrance? 4th, I corrected. But 3rd with a group. The first time was just Ava. Carla leaned back, nodding slowly. And you've already filed the property deed under your name locally? Yes. Grandpa made it easy. I pulled the notarized documents from the folder. Not only that, there's a protective usage clause tied to maintaining the land's historic profile and ownership. Anyone else setting foot here without written permission violates it outright. Carla smiled at that. He really planned this out. Most people don't expect their own family to be the ones they need protection from. She drew up the preliminary papers that same morning. A civil trespass complaint, cease and desist order, and a motion for recovery of damages, filed under violation of the property's protective trust rules. I signed them without hesitation. My hands didn't even shake. You're doing this the right way, Carla said before I left. Let the law speak so you don't have to. All the energy I once wasted second-guessing myself now had direction, structure, something I could hold. Later that day, I printed copies of the official notices and mailed them to both Cheryl's home and the apartment Ava shared with her influencer roommates. Certified mail, signed receipt required. I added a printed version of the video transcript from Ava's Rural Vibes and Cabin Drama livestream for good measure, just in case they forgot what they admitted to, publicly. By week's end, I also filed a complaint with the local sheriff's office. Not criminal charges yet, but a formal documentation of what had occurred. The officer on duty was around my age, polite, with that casual local town energy that gives you either complete indifference or complete investment. In this case, I got the latter. He said, "Oh yeah, we know those girls. Had to shut down a parking issue last summer. You got all this captured." "Every second," I said, handing him a flash drive. He whistled a little under his breath. "You've got more receipts than my grandma at Walgreens." That night, I returned to the cabin, mine, unforgivingly mine, and turned on every lantern and light I had. Not because I was scared, because I wanted them to know I was home. No secrets, no hiding, no hoping they'd come to their senses. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was boundaries made visible. Sat by the fireplace with the deed in my lap while the dog-eared notebook Grandpa left sat, open beside me to a sentence I hadn't noticed before. The difference between kind and soft is knowing when your silence becomes endorsement. He was right. I'd been soft just long enough. They'd see what kind looks like when it picks up a pen instead of a bat. When it arms itself with proof, law, and a mountain of patience finally reaching its summit. They wanted to call it a summer home. Fine. Let the season begin. In court. It was almost poetic the way it happened, like the universe waited for the perfect backdrop. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the ridge, staining the sky with that kind of peach-orange glow people pay thousands to capture on film. And wouldn't you know it, Ava was filming. She'd come back for round 5, or maybe 6. I'd stopped counting. This time, she'd brought a smaller crew, 2 girls and a guy holding a mini drone in one hand and iced coffee in the other. No music, just talk. Bright Instagram voices echoing into sacred quiet. I didn't confront her. I didn't step onto the porch. I didn't even peek out the curtain. I just sat inside, watching the footage live on my phone through the outdoor camera, sipping coffee with the kind of stillness Grandpa had taught me. Once comes after you've done all you can, because this visit, it didn't belong to me anymore. At 6:42 p.m., a white SUV with sheriff decals rolled slowly down the gravel. 2 deputies stepped out. One adjusted his belt. The other popped on a body cam. Then they walked, calm, direct, entirely professional, up the steps where Ava was talking to her phone. No, but seriously, this place is like a mix between Yellowstone and an indie horror movie. She paused, mid-sentence, turning just in time to see the sheriff. Her face faltered. The drone wobbled in the sky. One of the girls gasped, barely catching her tote bag before it slipped. "Miss Jasper?" one deputy said. Hi?" Ava tucked her phone behind her leg. "Can I help you with something?" "Yes, ma'am. We have a signed trespass complaint, certificate of ownership, and an enforceable cease and desist issued for this property. We're going to need you to begin removing your belongings immediately." And just like that, her entire performance shattered. "Wait, what?" She looked around at her friends, then back to them. "You're kidding, right?" "No, ma'am, we're not, but this is my family's cabin." One deputy opened his portfolio calmly. "The property is owned in full by your cousin, under a private deed and protected use designation. You've been served 3 times. This is now an active enforcement matter." The guy with the drone started backing toward the Jeep. "But my mom..." Ava's voice cracked. She said it wasn't official. That nothing could happen because we're family. Her laugh was sharp, desperate. "You can't just evict your own blood." "We're not evicting anyone, ma'am," the second deputy said, not unkindly. "We're executing formal removal from private property." By the time the 3rd warning was issued, Ava had stopped talking completely. One of the girls started crying. The other made a flailing attempt to call Aunt Cheryl, who, of course, showed up less than 10 minutes later in a cloud of expired perfume and righteous fury. She didn't even look at me as she marched up the porch. She went straight for the sheriff. "This is an abuse of power," she snapped. "I'll be contacting the mayor. This is a family matter and should never have made it this far." The sheriff calmly tilted his head. "Ma'am, I'm just enforcing the law as defined by your father's estate and your niece's rightful ownership." My presence finally registered. Her head whipped toward me like she'd just spotted a cockroach in her kitchen. "You think this little stunt makes you powerful?" she hissed. "Humiliating Ava in public? Dragging this out for strangers to tattle about over potato salad?" "I didn't want this," I said. "I gave you every chance." "Your grandfather would be ashamed." "No," I said, quieter but firm. "He'd be proud I finally stood my ground." She opened her mouth again, but the sheriff interrupted. "We'll give you another 20 minutes. Anything left behind will be cataloged and held." Ava didn't speak. She just stared at me, not with anger, not even shame, but that glossy, disbelieving look of someone who honestly never thought they could lose. I watched them load their branded totes, their props, their ring lights. I watched as that same Jeep jerked backwards out of the drive, kicking up all that golden light into a choking cloud. The gossip started immediately. Half the town's Facebook moms posted subtweets about cousin entitlement. Someone filmed just enough to catch Ava pouting against the railing while a deputy read her the notice. "Influencer gets kicked out of dead grandpa's cabin," became the local joke inside 2 hours, but I didn't smile. Not yet. I just swept the porch. One long, slow push of the broom, while the sun finally disappeared. Now, I thought, now we begin. The hearing was scheduled on a Tuesday morning. I wore the only suit I owned, the same charcoal gray one I'd used for Grandpa's funeral. I almost didn't want to, but something about the circle of it felt fitting. Back then it had carried my grief. Today, it carried my resolve. Carla walked beside me through the courthouse doors like a shield I didn't know I needed. She didn't waste time with fluff. Her case was airtight. She reminded me of that as we sat down. "Don't get riled," she whispered. "They will try, but this judge doesn't respond to dramatics. Come in with truth, and with proof." Aunt Cheryl entered 10 minutes late, flanked by Ava and a lawyer who looked like he specialized in real estate deals that made rich people richer. Ava had traded her bohemian linen for a sleek black outfit and sunglasses, like she was walking into paparazzi rather than court. The moment they saw me sitting up front, Cheryl's nostrils flared. She leaned toward Ava and whispered something as if they didn't already know exactly why we were there. The judge entered and everyone stood. It began. The opening statements were straightforward. Carla laid out the case, citing ownership, privacy breaches, property damage, trust protection clauses, and, finally, emotional distress, supported by mountain evidence and outright digital admissions. Then it was Cheryl's turn. Her lawyer leaned into some half-baked narrative about family miscommunication, unclear boundaries, and an assumed right to shared property, based on family legacy and mutual sentiment. It wasn't just flimsy, it was insulting. Finally, the judge motioned for both parties to approach and speak if they needed clarity. Carla gave me a slight nod. I stood. "It wasn't unclear," I said. "They knew I inherited the cabin." Ava mocked me for it the day of the will reading, said it was barely livable. I didn't deny them access because I'm selfish. I asked them, kindly, repeatedly. They didn't just ignore me. My voice stayed low. They laughed. The judge turned to Cheryl. "Ma'am, do you have a response?" And just like that, the performance began. Tears welled in her eyes, and she brought both hands to her chest, like she was auditioning for grief she hadn't earned. "You would do this to your own blood?" she cried, voice rising in practiced shakes. "Embarrass your cousin? Take us to court over a dusty old cabin? You know how much we've been through." Her father left. I raised her alone. We've done everything for this family. And now you sit there like we're the villains because we tried to make something beautiful out of something. Forgotten, I didn't interrupt. I waited, and when she finished, chest heaving like she'd just delivered her final act before applause, I stepped forward again. "No," I said. "You don't get to rewrite what happened." Her face froze. "For years," I continued, voice sharper now, "I've been invisible at family dinners. Talked over, brushed aside. When Grandpa trusted me with something that meant everything to him, something none of you even wanted, you treated it like a joke." I took a breath. "Steady." "You laughed when I got the cabin," I said evenly. "Laughed. Now you're crying because it was never yours." The silence in the room hung so heavy, I could feel it pushing against my skin. The judge leaned forward. "Based on the property deeds, applicable trespassing laws, and all accompanying documentation, including recorded evidence and testimony, I'm granting the plaintiff's full request." His gavel dropped. "In addition, I'm awarding damages for restoration and emotional duress in the amount of $7,000. Miss Jasper, Miss Cheryl, any further trespass or violations of this order will escalate to criminal charges." Ava looked like she'd been slapped. Cheryl stood frozen, blinking rapidly. Outside, the hallway felt bigger than I remembered. Not because it was wide, but because I could finally breathe there. They followed behind me, quiet at first. But halfway to the exit, that venom found its fangs again. "You think this makes you better than us?" Aunt Cheryl spat. "You were always the lonely one. Sad little backyard kid with your nose in books. And now what? You think Grandpa choosing you means you're anything more than lucky?" I turned calm again. "Tired but clean. No," I said. "It means I kept what you never could. His trust." And I walked away. I didn't gloat. I didn't look back. Karma had already done that part for me. By the time summer ended, the cabin finally felt like mine again. Not just on paper, not just in a legal file bookmarked with court dates and signatures, but in the air. In the walls, in the silence between the wind and the creek. I stopped waiting for the crunch of Ava's tires on the gravel. Stopped checking the cameras every night. I still kept them on. I'm not a fool. But the difference was I slept without needing proof. I had peace, and it no longer felt temporary. Fixing things was slow. At first, it was about undoing their mess. Repairing, replacing, scrubbing their footprints out of the spaces I loved. But after a while, something shifted. It wasn't just recovery, it was renewal. I sanded down the banister they dented, dragging a ring light up the stairs, then stained it deeper than before. I patched the torn screen in the back window, then replaced the entire frame, because patching wasn't enough. I rebuilt the fence they knocked over behind the garden, using lumber Grandpa had set aside and never used. I imagined him nodding in his quiet way every time I got something level on the first try. The cabin taught me how to be still again. It taught me how to heal without rushing. I raked the same patch of ground every morning, not because it needed it, but because it anchored me. I learned which birds came at what time of day, which breeze came down off the north slope hours before the weather app caught up. I started writing again. Not online, not for anyone but me. Real pen paper. Mornings with coffee and fog still wrapping itself around the trees like a blanket that didn't want to let go. A few months in, a journalist from the local paper reached out. Turns out someone at the courthouse had tipped him off about that family drama at the Pine Cabin. He wanted to do an op-ed series on land use, legacy, and quiet reversals. I told him I wasn't interested in drama, but if he wanted to write about dignity, patience, and the difference between keeping something because it looks nice and keeping something because it means something, then sure. He showed up with a notebook and patience, listened more than he talked. When the piece came out a few weeks later, it was titled, "Not All Inheritances Are Meant to Be Shared." Nothing flashy. No names, just a reflection on ownership. What it means to steward something instead of grabbing it and reshaping it for profit or ego. I kept a copy of the article folded under a stack of firewood by the stove, not to show off, but as a reminder that the story people assumed was about taking revenge had never really been about revenge at all. It had been about keeping something safe. One afternoon, long after the media cycle moved on, and Ava's following faded into limp engagement stats, I walked into the cabin after restocking at the feed store and paused just inside the door. There it was, the original nail. Grandpa had hammered into the beam just beside the door, meant for keys that never left the house. I'd ignored it at first, setting my keys on the counter or tossing them into a ceramic bowl. But suddenly it felt right. I picked them up, held them in my palm, still warm from the sun, then I hung them there, simple, quiet, final, a key on a nail, rights reclaimed, peace restored. Inside my chest, it clicked too. I had fixed what they broke, and even after all they took, they hadn't touched the most important part. They never could. They never will. It came on a Monday morning, tucked between a weather alert and a grocery store receipt, a text from Ava. No greeting, no context. Just, hey, sorry things got so messy. I didn't mean to make it such a drama fest. I thought it would be chill since Mom said it wasn't a big deal. Hope we can just let it go now. No punctuation after now. No acknowledgement of the months-long chaos she'd caused. The damage, the entitlement. The strain it put between every broken branch we ever pretended was a family tree. Just a shrug of words. Not an apology for what she did. An apology for how I reacted to it. I stared at the screen for a long time. The phone buzzed again. Also, the TikTok stuff was so overblown, lol. Hope people stopped bringing it up for you. That part made me laugh. Sharp and cold, like breath pulled through your teeth on icy mornings. No, people weren't still talking about it. Because people move on. Their outrage rotates. But some of us are still standing in what's left behind. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have things to say. I had enough words inside me for 10 years of silences. I could have written her a novel of all the tiny ways entitlement looks when it's dressed up as charm. But I think the silence said it better. There is no keyboard sound loud enough to speak for what she stole. Not just space, not just a cabin, but the dignity of something earned and trusted, something cared for, something given freely that she took like it was owed. So no, I didn't reply. I left her little gray messages sitting in my notifications, unopened. That's how I know it'll stay, because if I open them, I give them shape. If I open them, part of me says her version of this story matters as much as mine. It doesn't. What mattered is this. The cabin is mine. The porch is fixed. The shelves are filled with my own new things. The air here is quiet in a way no text could ever reach. Winter came late this year. The first frost crept through the garden like it didn't want to wake me. I sat on the porch with a mug of black coffee and watched it dust the trees. There's a calm in knowing you chose not to be bitter, even when the world handed you every excuse to be. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't always come with a handshake or a text bubble. Sometimes it's a boundary, sometimes it's a closed door, and sometimes forgiveness is knowing you finally don't care enough to need them to get it. They made it their summer home. I made it my life back.